I am Lady Rain. This is the Reader's Nook. We are reading chapter 75, or most of it today, for The Stand. Now, we ready? Chapter 75. I almost died, you know, Nick said. He and Tom were walking the empty sidewalk together. The wind howled steadily, an endless ghost train highballing through the black sky. It made odd, low hooting noises in the alleyways. Honks, Tom would have said awake, and run away. But he wasn't awake, not exactly, and Nick was with him. Sleet smacked coldly against their cheeks. You did? Tom asked. My laws! Nick laughed. His voice was low and musical. A good voice. Tom loved to listen to him talk. Sure did. That's a big laws, yes. The flu didn't get me, but a little scratch along the leg almost did. Here, look at this. Seemingly oblivious of the cold, Nick unbuckled his jeans and pushed them down. Tom bent forward curiously, no different from any small boy who has been offended and offered a glimpse of a wart with hair growing out of it, or an interesting wound or puncture. Running down Nick's leg was an ugly scar, barely healed. It started just below the groin, in the slab part of the thigh, and corkscrewed past the knee to mid-shin when it finally petered out. And that almost killed you? Nick pulled up his jeans and belted them. It wasn't deep, but it got infected. Infection means that the bad germs got into it. Infection's the most dangerous thing there is, Tom. Infection is what made the superflu germ kill all the people. And the infection is what made people want to make the germ in the first place. An infection of the mind. Infection, Tom whispered, fascinated. They were walking again, almost floating along the sidewalk. Tom, Stu's got an infection now. No, don't say that, Nick. You're scaring Tom Cullen. Laws, yes, you are. I know I am, Tom, and I'm sorry, but you have to know. He has pneumonia in both lungs. He's been sleeping outside for nearly 2 weeks. There are things you have to do for him, and still, he'll almost certainly die. You have to be prepared for that. No, don't, Tom. Nick put his hand on Tom's shoulder, but Tom felt nothing. It was as if Nick's hand was nothing but smoke. If he dies, you and Kojak have to go on. You have to get back to Boulder and tell them that you saw the hand of God in the desert. If that's God's will, Stu will go with you, in time. If it's God's will that Stu should die, then he will, like me. Nick, Tom begged, please. I showed you my leg. For a reason. There are pills for infections in places like this. Tom looked around and was surprised to see that they were no longer on the street. They were in a drug store. A wheelchair was suspended on piano wire from the ceiling like a ghostly mechanical corpse. A sign on Tom's right advertised continence supplies. Yes, sir, may I help you? Tom whirled around. Nick was behind the counter in a white coat. Nick! Yes, sir. Nick began to put small bottles of pills in front of Tom. This is penicillin, very good for pneumonia. This is ampicillin, and this one's amoxicillin, also good stuff. And this is vicillin, most commonly given to children, and it may work if the others don't. He's to drink lots of water, and he should have juices, but they may not be possible, so give him these. They're vitamin C tablets also. He must be walked. I can't remember all that, Tom wailed. I'm afraid you'll have to, because there's no one else. You're on your own. Tom began to cry. Nick leaned forward. His arm swung. There was no slap. Again, there was only that feeling that Nick was smoke, which had passed around him and possibly through him. But Tom felt his head rock back all the same. Something in his head seemed to snap. Stop that! You can't be a baby now, Tom. Be a man. For God's sake, be a man. Tom stared at Nick, his hand on his cheek, his eyes wide. Oh, I almost forgot. Give me 1 second. Disclaimer. Fix that later. I almost forgot this. There we go. Now we got it pinned until the end of our chat. Tom stared at Nick, his hand on his cheek, his eyes wide. Walk him, Nick said. Get him on his good leg. Drag him if you have to, but get him off his back or he'll drown. He isn't himself, Tom said. He shouts. He shouts to people who aren't there. He's delirious. Walk him anyway. All you can. Make him take the penicillin 1 pill at a time. Give him aspirin. Keep him warm. Pray. Those are all the things you can do. All right, Nick. All right, I'll try to be a man. I'll try to remember. But I wish you was here, laws, yes I do. You do your best, Tom. That's all. Nick was gone. Tom woke up and found himself standing in the deserted drugstore by the prescription counter. Standing on the glass were 4 bottles of pills. Tom stared at them for a long time and then gathered them up. Tom came back at 4 in the morning, his shoulders frosted with sleep. Outside it was letting up, and there was a thin, clean line of dawn in the east. Kojak barked an ecstatic welcome. Stu moaned and woke up. Tom knelt beside him. Stu? Tom, hard to breathe. I've got medicine, Stu. Nick showed me. You take it and get rid of that infection. You have to take one now, right now. From the bag he had brought in, Tom produced the 4 bottles of pills and the tall bottle of Gatorade. Nick had been wrong about the juice. There was plenty of bottled juice in the Green River Superette. Stu looked at the pills, holding them closely to his eyes. Tom, where did you get these? In the drugstore. Nick gave them to me. No, really. Really? You have to take the penicillin first to see if that works. Which one says penicillin? This one does, but Tom. No, you have to. Nick said so. And you have to walk. I can't walk. I got a busted leg and I'm sick. Stu's voice became sulky. Sulky, petulant. It was a sickroom voice. You have to, or I'll drag you, Tom said. Stu lost his tenuous grip on reality. Tom put one of the penicillin caplets in his mouth, and Stu, reflex, swallowed it with Gatorade to keep from choking. He began to cough wretchedly anyway, and Tom pounded him on the back as if he were burping a baby, and then he hauled Stu to his good foot by main force and began to drag him around the lobby. Kojak following them anxiously. Please, God, Tom said. Please, God, please, God. Stu cried out, I know where I can get her a washboard, Glenn. That music store has 'em. I seen 'em in the window. Please, God, Tom panted. Stu's head lolled on his shoulder. It felt as hot as a furnace. His splinted leg dragged uneasily. Boulder had never seemed so far away as it did on this dismal morning. Stu's struggle with pneumonia lasted 2 weeks. He drank quarts of Gatorade, V8, Welch's grape juice, and various brands of orange drink. He rarely knew what he was drinking. His urine was strong and acidic. He messed himself like a baby, and like a baby's his stools were yellow and loose and totally blameless. Tom kept him clean. Tom dragged him around the lobby of the Utah hotel, and Tom waited for the night when he would wake, not because Stu was raving in his sleep, but because his labored breathing had finally ceased. The penicillin produced an ugly red rash after 2 days, and Tom switched to ampicillin. That was better. On October 7th, Tom woke up in the morning to find Stu sleeping more deeply than he had in days. His entire body was soaked with sweat, but his forehead was cool. The fever had snapped in the night. For the next 2 days, Stu did little but sleep. Tom had to struggle to wake him up enough to take his pills and sugar cubes from the restaurant attached to the Utah hotel. He relapsed on October 11th, and Tom was terribly afraid it was the end. But the fever never did go as high, and his respiration never got as thick and labored as it had been on those terrifying early mornings of the 5th and the 6th. On October 13th, Tom woke up from a day's nap in one of the lobby chairs to find Stu sitting up and looking around. Tom, he whispered. I'm alive. Yes, Tom said joyfully. Laws, yes. I'm hungry. Could you rustle up some soup, Tom, with noodles in it, maybe? By the 18th, his strength had begun to come back a little. He was able to get around the lobby for 5 minutes at a time on the crutches Tom brought him from the drugstore. There was a steady, maddening itch from his broken leg as the bones began to knit themselves together. On October 20th, he went outside for the first time, bundled up in thermal underwear and a huge sheepskin coat. The day was warm and sunny, but with an undertone of coolness. In Boulder, it might still be mid-fall, the aspens turning gold. But here, winter was almost close enough to touch. He could see small patches of frozen, granulated snow in shadowy areas the sun never touched. "I don't know, Tom," he said. "I think we can get over to Grand Junction, but after that, I just don't know. There's going to be a lot of snow in the mountains, and I don't dare move for a while anyway. I've got to get my go back. How long before your go comes back, Stu?" I don't know, Tom. We'll just have to wait and see." Stu was determined not to move too quickly, not to push it. He had been close enough to death to relish his recovery. He wanted it to be as complete as it could be. They moved out of the hotel lobby into a pair of connecting rooms down the first floor hall. The rooms across the way became Kojak's temporary doghouse. Stu's leg was indeed knitting, but out of the improper set. It was never going to be the same straight limb again, unless he got George Richardson to re-break it and set it properly. When he got off the crutches, he was going to have a limp. Nonetheless, he set to work exercising it, trying to tone it up. Bringing the leg back to even 75% efficiency was going to be a long process. But so far, as he could tell, he had a whole winter to do it in. On October 28th, Green River was dusted with nearly 5 inches of snow. "If we don't make our move soon," Stu told Tom as they looked out at the snow, "we'll be spending the whole damn winter in the hotel." The next day they drove the Plymouth down to the gas station on the outskirts of town, pausing often to rest and using Tom for the heavy work. They changed the balding back tires for a pair of studded snows. Stu considered taking a 4-wheel drive and had finally decided, quite irrationally, that they should stick with their luck. Tom finished the operation by loading 4 50-pound bags of sand into the Plymouth's trunk. They left Green River on Halloween and headed east. They reached Grand Junction at noon on November 2nd, with not much more than 3 hours to spare, as it turned out. The skies had been lead gray all the forenoon, and as they turned down the main street, the first spits of snow began to skate across the Plymouth's hood. They had seen brief flurries half a dozen times en route, but this was not going to be a flurry. The sky promised serious snow. "Pick your spot," Stu said. "We may be here for a while." Tom pointed. "There, the motel with the star on it." The motel with the star on it was the Grand Junction Holiday Inn. Below the sign and the beckoning star was a marquee, and written on it in large and red letters was "Elcome to Grand Junction's Summerfest 90, June 12th to July 4th. So the W in welcome, the A in grand, the TI in junction, the E in fest, and the L in July are all missing. So that's what that was about. So welcome to Grand Junction Summerfest 90, June 12th to July 4th. "Okay," Stu said, "Holiday Inn it is." He pulled in and killed the Plymouth's engine, and as far as either of them knew, it ran again. By 2 that afternoon, the spits and spats of snow had developed into a thick white curtain that fell soundlessly and seemingly endlessly. By 4 o'clock, the light wind had turned into a gale, driving the snow before it and piling up drifts that grew with a speed which was almost hallucinatory. It snowed all night. When Stu and Tom got up the next morning, they found Kojak sitting in front of the big double doors in the lobby, looking for a nearly moveless world of white. 1 second. The hell? No idea who that was. I forgot to tell my daughter. So the reason I was late is because I was helping with the rental car for my daughter, and she's headed over to get it now. So do 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 do. Okay, into a speed which was almost hallucinatory. It snowed all night. When Stu and Tom got up the next morning, they found Kojak sitting in front of the big double doors in the lobby, looking out at a nearly moveless world of white. Nothing moved but a single blue jay that was strutting around on the crushed remnants of summer awning across the street. Jeezly crow, Tom whispered. We're snowed in, aren't we, Stu? Stu nodded. How can we get back to Boulder in this? We wait for spring, Stu said. That long? Tom looked distressed, and Stu put an arm around the big man boy's shoulders. The time will pass, he said. But even then, he was not sure either of them would be able to wait that long. Stu had been moaning and grasping in the darkness for some time. At last he gave a cry loud enough to wake himself up and came out of the dream to his Holiday Inn motel room, up on his elbows, staring wide-eyed at nothing. He let out a long, shivery sigh and fumbled for the lamp by the bed table. He had clicked it twice before everything came back. It was funny how hard that belief in electricity died. He found the Coleman lamp on the floor and lit that instead. When he had it going, he used the chamber pot. Then he sat down in the chair by the desk. He looked at his watch and saw it was 3:15 in the morning. The dream again. The Franny dream. The nightmare. It was always the same. Franny in pain, her face bathed in sweat. Richardson was between her legs. Laurie Constable was standing nearby to assist him. Fran's legs were up in stainless steel stirrups. Push, Franny, bear down. You're doing fine. But looking at George's somber eyes over the top of his mask, Stu knew that Franny wasn't doing fine at all. Something was wrong. Laurie sponged off her sweaty face and pushed her hair from her forehead. Breech, baby. Who had said that? It was a sinister, bodiless voice, low and draggy, like a voice on a 45 RPM record played at 33 1/3. Breech birth, breech birth. George's voice. You'd better call Dick. Tell him we may have to. Laurie's voice. Doc, she's losing a lot of blood now. Stu lit a cigarette. It was terribly stale. And after that particular dream, anything was a comfort. It's an anxiety dream, that's all. You've got this typical macho idea that things won't come right if you're not there. Well, bag it up, Stuart. She's fine. Not all dreams come true. But too many of them had come true during the last half year. The feeling that he was being shown the future in this recurring dream of Fran's delivery would not leave him. He stubbed the cigarette out half-smoked and looked blankly into the gas lamp's steady glow. It was November 29th. They had been quartered in the Grand Junction Holiday Inn for nearly 4 weeks. The time had passed slowly, but they had managed to keep amused with a whole town of plunder for diverting odds and ends. Stu had found a medium-sized Honda electrical generator in a supply house on Grand Avenue, and he and Tom had hauled it back to the convention hall across from the Holiday Inn by putting it into a sledge with a chain fall and then hooking up 2 snowcats to the sledge, moving it, in other words, in much the same way the trash can man had moved his final gift to Randall Flagg. What are we going to do with it? Tom asked. Get the electricity going in the motel? At the motel? This is too small for that, Stu said. What then? What's it for? Tom was fairly dancing with impatience. You'll see, Stu said. They put the generator in the convention hall's electric closet, and Tom promptly forgot about it, which was just what Stu had hoped for. The next day, he went to the Grand Junction Sixplex by snowmobile, and using the sledge and the chain fall himself this time, he had lowered an old 35mm motion picture projector from the second-story window of the storage area where he had found it on one of his exploring trips. It had been wrapped in plastic, and then simply forgotten, judging by the dust which had gathered on the protective covering. His leg was coming around nicely, but it was still taking him almost 3 hours to muscle the projector from the doorway of the convention hall into the center of the floor. He used 3 dollies and kept expecting Tom to happen by in any moment, looking for him. With Tom to pitch in, the work would have gone faster, but it also would have spoiled the surprise. But Tom was apparently off on business of his own, and Stu didn't see him all day. When he came into the Holiday Inn around 5, apple-cheeked and wrapped in a scarf, the surprise was all ready. Stu had brought back all 6 of the movies which had been playing in the Grand Junction Cinema Complex. After supper that evening, Stu said casually, "Come over to the convention hall with me, Tom." "What for?" "You'll see." The convention hall faced the Holiday Inn across the snowy street. Stu handed Tom a box of popcorn at the doorway. "What's this for?" Tom asked. "Can't watch a movie without popcorn, you big dummy." Stu grinned. "Movie?" "Sure." Tom burst into the convention hall, saw the big projector set up, completely threaded, saw the big convention movie screen pulled down, saw 2 folding chairs set up in the middle of the huge empty floor. "Wow," he whispered, and his expression of naked wonder had been all Stu could have hoped for. "I did this 3 summers at the Starlight Drive-In over in Braintree," Stu said. "I hope I ain't forgot how to fix one of these bastards if the film breaks." Yeah, my voice is a bit harsh. I'm sick. But no, I ain't got a Michael Jackson voice, sorry. But yeah, I'm trying to fight off a cold, so my voice is a little off. "Wow," Tom said again. "We'll have to wait in between reels. I wasn't about to go back and grab a second one." Stu stepped through the welter of patch cords leading from the projector to the Honda generator in the electric closet and pulled the starter cord. The generator began to chug cheerfully along. Stu shut the door as far as it would go to mute the engine sound and killed the lights. And 5 minutes later, they were sitting side by side watching Sylvester Stallone kill hundreds of dope dealers in Rambo 4, The Firefight. Dolby sound blared at them from the convention hall's 16 speakers, sometimes so loud it was hard to hear the dialogue, what dialogue there was. But they had both loved it. Now, thinking about that, Stu smiled. Someone who didn't know better would have called him dumb. He could have hooked a VCR up to a much smaller genie, and they could have watched hundreds of movies that way, probably right in the Holiday Inn. But movies on TV were not the same, never had been, to his way of thinking, anyway. And that wasn't really the point, either. The point was simply that they had time to kill, and some days it died goddamn hard. Anyway, one of the films had been a reissue of one of the last Disney cartoons, Oliver and Company, which had never been released on videotape. Tom watched it again and again, laughing like a child at the antics of Oliver and the Artful Dodger and Fagin, who, in the cartoon, lived on a barge in New York and slept in a stolen airplane seat. In addition to the movie project, Stu had built over 20 models, including a Rolls-Royce that had 240 parts and had sold for $65 before the Superflu. Tom had built a strange but somehow compelling terrain contoured landscape that covered nearly half the floor space of the Holiday Inn's main function room. He had used papier-mâché, plaster Paris, and various food colorings. He called it Moonbase Alpha. Yes, they had kept busy, but what you're thinking is crazy. His leg is flexed. He flexed his leg. Oh my God. It was in better shape than he had ever he ever would have hoped. Partially thanks to the Holiday Inn's weight room and exercising machines. There was still considerable stiffness and some pain, but he was able to limp around without crutches. They could take it slow and easy. He was quite sure he could show Tom how to run one of the Arctic cats that almost everyone around here kept packed away in the back of their garages. Do 20 miles a day, pack shelter halves, big sleeping bags, plenty of those freeze-dried concentrates. Sure, and when the avalanche comes down on you in Vale Pass, you and Tom can wave a pack of freeze-dried carrots at it and tell it to go away. It's crazy. Still, he crushed his smoke and turned off the gas lamp, but it was a long time before he slept. Over breakfast, he said, Tom, how badly do you want to get back to Boulder? And see Fran, Dick, Sandy? Laws, I want to get back to Boulder worse than anything, Stu. You don't think they gave me my little house away, do you? You don't think they gave my little house away, do you? No, I'm sure they didn't. What I mean is, would it be worth it to you to take a chance? Tom looked at him puzzled. Stu was getting ready to try and explain further when Tom said, Laws, everything's a chance, isn't it? It was decided. As simple as that. They left Grand Junction on the last day of November, which was the following day, by the way it sounds. There was no need to teach Tom the fundamentals of snowmobiling. Stu found a monster machine in the Colorado Highway Department shed, not a mile from the Holiday Inn. It had an oversized engine, a fairing to cut the worst of the wind, and most of all, it had been modified to include a large, open storage compartment. It had once, no doubt, held all manner of emergency gear. The compartment was big enough to take one good-sized dog comfortably. With a number of stops in town devoted to outdoor activities, they had no trouble at all in outfitting themselves for the trip. Even though the superflu had struck at the beginning of summer, they took light shelter halves and heavy sleeping bags, a pair of cross-country skis each. Although the thought of trying to reach town or to teach Tom the fundamentals of cross-country skiing made Stu's blood run cold. A big Coleman gas stove, lamps, gas bottles, extra batteries, concentrated foods, and a big Garand rifle with a scope. By 2 o'clock on that first day, Stu saw that his fear of being snowed in someplace and starving to death was groundless. The woods were fairly crawling with game. He had never seen anything like it in his life. Later that afternoon he shot a deer, his first deer since the 9th grade, when he had played honky from school to go out hunting with his Uncle Dale. That deer had been a scrawny doe, whose meat had been wild-tasting and rather bitter from eating needles, Uncle Dale said. This one was a buck, fine and heavy and broad-chested, but then Stu thought as he gutted it with the big knife he had liberated from the Grand Junction sporting goods store, the winter had just started. Nature had her own way of dealing with overpopulation. Tom built a fire while Stu butchered the deer as best he could, getting the sleeves of his heavy coat stiff and tacky with blood. By the time he was done with the deer, it had been dark 3 hours, and his bad leg was singing Ave Maria. The deer he had gotten with Uncle Dale had gone to an old man named Shuey, who lived in a shack just over the Braintree town line. He had skinned and dressed the deer for $3.10 a pound of deer meat. Oh, $3.10 of deer meat. Okay. I sure wish old Shuey was here tonight, he said with a sigh. Who? Tom asked, coming out of his semi-doze. No one, Tom, talking to myself. As it turned out, the venison was worth it, sweet and delicious. After they had eaten their fill, Stu cooked about 30 pounds of extra meat and packed it away in one of the Highway Department snowmobile's small storage compartments the next morning. That first day, they only made 16 miles. That night, the dream changed. He was in the delivery room again. There was blood everywhere. The sleeves of the white coat he was wearing were stiff and tacky with it. The sheet covering Franny was soaked through. And still she shrieked. "It's coming," George panted. "It's time to come around at last. The time has come around at last, Franny. It's waiting to be born. So push, push!" And it came. It came with a final freshet of blood. George pulled the infant free, grasping the hips before it came. It had come because it had come feet first. Lori began to scream. Stainless steel instruments sprayed everywhere. Because it was a wolf with a furious, grinning human face. His face. It was Flagg. His time had come around again. He was not dead. Not dead yet. He still walked the world. Franny had given birth to Randall Flagg. Stu woke up. His harsh breathing loud in his ears. Had he screamed? Tom was still asleep, huddled so deeply in his sleeping bag that Stu could only see his cowlick. Kojak was curled at Stu's side. Everything was all right. It had only been a dream. And then a single howl rose in the night, climbing, ululating, a silver chime of desperate horror. The howl of a wolf, or perhaps the screams of a killer's ghost. Kojak raised his head. Goose flesh broke out on Stu's arms, thighs, and groin. The howl didn't come again. Stu slept. In the morning they packed up and went on. It was Tom who noticed and pointed out that the deer guts were all gone. There was a flurry of tracks where they had been, and the blood stain of Stu's kill faded to a dull pink on the snow. But that was all. 5 days of good weather brought them to Rifle. The next morning they woke to a deepening blizzard. Stu said he thought they should wait it out here, and they put up in a local motel. Tom held the lobby doors open, and Stu drove the snowmobile right inside. As he told Tom, it made a handy garage, although the snowmobile's heavy-duty tread had chewed up the lobby's deep pile rug considerably. It snowed for 3 days. The snow was much deeper now, and it had gotten more difficult to read the twists and turns of I-70. But it wasn't keeping to the highway that worried Stu on that bright, warm, and sunny day. In the late afternoon, as the blue shadows began to lengthen, Stu throttled down and then killed the snowmobile's engine, his head cocked, his whole body seeming to listen. "What is it, Stu? What's—" Then Tom heard it too. A low rumbling sound off to their left and up ahead. It swelled to a deep express train roar and faded. The afternoon was still again. "Stu?" Tom asked anxiously. "Don't worry," he said, and thought, "I'll worry enough for both of us." The warm temperatures held. By December 13th, they were nearly to Shoshone, and still climbing toward the roof of the Rockies. For them, the highest point they would reach before beginning to ascend again would be Loveland Pass. Again and again, they heard the low rumble of avalanches, sometimes far away, sometimes so close that there was nothing to do but look up and wait and hope those great shelves of white death would not blot out the sky. On the 12th, one swept down and over a place where they had been only half an hour before, burying the snowmobile's tracks under tons of packed snow. Stu was increasingly afraid that the vibration caused by the sound of the snowmobile's engine would be what finally killed them, triggering a spot to bury them 40 feet deep before they even had time enough to realize what was happening. But now there was nothing to do but press on and hope for the best. Then the temperatures plunged again, and the threat abated somewhat. There was another storm, and they had stopped for 2 days. They dug out and went on, and at night the wolves howled. Sometimes they were far away. Sometimes they were close, so close that it seemed right outside the shelter halves, bringing Kojak to his feet, howling low in his chest, as taut as a steel spring. But the temperatures remained low, and the frequency of the avalanches diminished, although they had another near miss on the 18th. On December 22nd, outside the town of Avon, Stu ran the snowmobile off the highway embankment. At one moment they were running along at a steady 10 miles an hour, safe and fine, spuming up clouds of snow behind them. Tom had just pointed out the small village below, silent as 1980s stereoptic stereo stereoptic stereopticon image with its single white church steeple and the undisturbed drifts up to the eaves of the houses. The next moment, the cowling of the snowmobile began to tilt forward. What the fuck? Stu began, and that was all he had time for. The snowmobile cantered further forward. Stu throttled back, but it was too late. There was a peculiar sensation of weightlessness, the feeling you have when you have just left the diving board and the pull of gravity just matches the force of your upward spring. They were pitched off the machine head over heels. Stu lost sight of Tom and Kojak. Cold snow up his nose. When he opened his mouth to shout, the snow went down his throat, down the back of his coat, tumbling, falling, finally coming to rest in a deep white quilt of snow. He fought his way up like a swimmer, grasping hot fire. His throat had been snow-burned. Tom, he shouted, treading snow. Oddly enough, from this angle he could see the highway embankment very clearly, and where they had run off, causing their own small avalanche as they did so. The rear end of the snowmobile jutted out of the snow about 50 feet further down the steep gradient. It looked like an orange buoy. Strange how the water imagery persisted. And by the way, was Tom drowning? Tommy! Kojak popped up, looking as if he had been dusted from stem to stern with confectioner's sugar, and breasted his way through the snow toward Stu. "Oh, Jack!" Stu shouted. Find Tom! Find Tom!" Kojak barked and struggled to turn around. He headed toward a churned-up place in the snow and barked again. Struggling, falling, eating snow, Stu got to the place and felt around. One gloved hand snagged Tom's jacket, and he gave a furious yank. Tom bobbed up, gasping and retching, and then both fell on top of the snow on their backs. Tom whooped and gasped. "My throat, it's all hot. Oh, yeah. Oh, lawsy me." "It's cold. It's the cold, Tom. It goes away." "I was choking." "It's all right now, Tom. We're going to be okay." They lay on top of the snow, getting their wind back. Stu put his arm around Tom's shoulders to still the big fellow's trembling. A distance away, gaining volume and then diminishing, was the rumbling cold sound of another avalanche. It took them the rest of the day to get the 3/4 of a mile between the place where they had run off the road and the town of Avalon. There was no question of salvaging the snowmobile or any of the supplies lashed to it. It was just too far down the grade. It would stay there until spring, at least, maybe forever, the way things were now. They got to town half an hour past dusk, too cold and winded to do anything but build a fire and find a halfway warm place to sleep. That night there were no dreams, only the blackness of utter exhaustion. In the morning, they set about the task of re-outfitting themselves. It was a tougher job in the small town of Avalon than it had been in Grand Junction. Stu again considered just stopping and wintering here. If he said it was the right thing to do, Tom would not question him, and they had had an illicit lesson in what happened to people who pressed their luck just yesterday. But in the end, he rejected the idea. The baby was due sometime in early January. He wanted to be there when it came. He wanted to see with his own eyes that it was all right. At the end of Avon's short main street, they found a John Deere dealership, and in the garage behind the showroom, they found 2 used Deere snowmobiles. Neither of them was quite as good as the big highway department machine Stu had driven off the road, but one of them had an extra wide cleated driving tread, and he thought it would do. They found no concentrates and had to settle for canned food instead. The latter half of the day was spent ransacking houses for camping gear, a job neither of them relished. The victims of the plagues were everywhere, transformed into grotesquely decaying ice cave exhibits. Or decayed ice cave exhibits. Near the end of the day, they found most of what they needed in one place. A large rooming house just off the main drag. Before the super flu struck, it had apparently been filled with young people, the sort who came to Colorado to do all the things John Deere used to sing about. Tom, in fact, found a large green plastic garbage bag with a crawl space under the stairs, filled with a very potent version of Rocky Mountain High. What's this? Is it tobacco, Stu? Stu grinned. Well, I guess some people thought so. It's loco weed, Tom. Leave it where you found it. They loaded the snowmobile carefully, storing away the canned goods, tying down new sleeping bags and shelter halves. By then, the first stars were coming out, and they decided to spend one more night in Avon. Driving slowly back over the crusting snow to the house where they had set up quarters. Stu had to be Christmas Eve. It seemed impossible to believe that time could have gone by so fast. But the proof was staring up at him from his calendar wristwatch. They had left Grand Junction over 3 weeks before. When they reached the house, Stu said, "You and Kojak go on in and get the fire going. I got a small errand to run." "What's that, Stu?" "Well, it's a surprise," Stu said. "Surprise? Am I going to find out?" "Yeah." "When?" Tom's eyes sparkled. "Couple of days." "Tom Collin can't wait a couple of days for a surprise. Laws, no, Tom Collin. We'll just have to," Stu said with a grin. "I'll be back in an hour. You just be ready to go." "Well, okay." It was more like an hour and a half before Stu had exactly what he wanted. Tom pestered him about the surprise. For the next 2 or 3 hours, Stu kept mum, and by the time they turned in, Tom had forgotten all about it. As they lay in the darkness, Stu said, "I bet by now you wish we'd stayed in Grand Junction, huh?" "Laws, no," Tom answered sleepily. "I want to get back to my little house just as fast as I can. I just hope we don't run off the road and fall into the snow again." Tom Collin almost choked. "We'll just have to go slower and try harder," Stu said, not mentioning what would probably happen if it did happen again, and there was no shelter within walking distance. "When do you think we'll be there, Stu?" "It'll be a while yet, old hoss, but we're getting there, and I think what we better do right now is get some sleep, don't you?" "I guess." Stu turned out the light. That night he dreamed that both Franny and her terrible wolf child had died in childbirth. He heard George Richardson say from a great distance, "It's the flu. No more babies because of the flu. Pregnancy is death because of the flu. A chicken in every pot and a wolf in every womb because of the flu. We're all done. Mankind is done because of the flu." And from somewhere nearer, closing in, came the dark man's howling laughter. On Christmas Eve, they began to run a good traveling that would last almost until the new year. The surface of the snow had crusted up in the cold. The wind blew swirling clouds of ice crystals over it to pile up in powdery